Hey everyone, welcome to the 296th episode of Primo Radical. I once again today am doing another monologue episode. There's no guests. Just want to check in with you as we are rapidly approaching the 300th episode, and that's going to be a celebration of 10 years of the show. As many of you know, for the last year we've been celebrating the 10th season, and that comes to a culmination with the 300th episode, and that's coming up pretty quickly. I wanted to record something over the weekend, but unfortunately was not able to. As I mentioned on a couple of recent shows, I've just been very busy lately. But I do want to keep recording these, as again, we are approaching the 300th episode. And you know, it's kind of a little bit of a misnomer that I've done 300 episodes, because it's actually been a little more than that, to tell you the truth. Because there was the show that I did originally on Rockfin and then moved over to Rumble, known as Uncensored. I think I did about a dozen episodes of that. I also, for a while, was doing live streams on the weekend called Saturday Morning Extremist, which was a lot of fun, just kind of ranting and raving, reading the news. So, technically it's been over 300 episodes, but as far as Primo Radical / Primo Nutmeg, we're going to keep the numbering going. And again, currently at 296 today, and just wanted to check in with you folks to kind of talk about the political landscape. Obviously, there was some big news over the past week with Donald Trump meeting President Vladimir Putin in Alaska. And unfortunately, it didn't seem as though they actually came away from that with any real agreement. The war in Ukraine is still going, and it seems as though there's no kind of agreement for a ceasefire or considerations for exactly which land would be given away, even though I think it's pretty clear to all of us that the land that Russia occupies now is probably going to remain under Russian control indefinitely. As many of you remember, at least a year or two ago, it was Vladimir Putin formally said that the Donbass was part of Russia. So it seems as though that's not going to change unless there was some major shift in what's happening on the ground in Ukraine. And I don't know about you, but it seems as though the war really kind of, I know we have these headlines about bombings and whatnot, but it seems as though the ground war hasn't been a major headline for the last year or two. It seems as though there's been just kind of a stalemate, and, there's still people dying, unfortunately, but it seems as though it's not this major conflict like it was at least in 2022. So we'll have to see what happens there. I just kind of come away with the perspective of eventually Europe and Ukraine are going to have to acknowledge that they're not going to win back land from Russia. And even though there was no agreement in this Trump-Putin meeting, it was a great thing that they both met. And you saw liberals getting very upset about this, and people suggesting that Vladimir Putin should have been taken out during this meeting, which is absolutely insane and just speaks to how crazy liberals are. And I also think it speaks to something that these Democrats were way more upset about this meeting than they were about the fact that Donald Trump has been protecting Jeffrey Epstein's clients. That I think is way more objectionable than trying to end a war. And every president since FDR has met with his Russian counterpart. This isn't a new thing. Biden met with Putin. Obama met with Putin and Medvedev when he was president. Clinton was friends with Yeltsin. Jimmy Carter, Nixon. It's just going back decades and decades. You can see every president has met with his Russian counterpart. So the fact that Donald Trump is meeting with Putin to try to end a war, and the fact that this is so enraging to liberals, just shows, again, it's not even like TDS, I think. It's really like Putin derangement syndrome or Russian derangement syndrome, or the fact that they recognize that any country that stands in the way of Western hegemony threatens their liberal elitist privilege, really is what it comes down to. Because they know that NATO is a mechanism of global Atlanticist liberal privilege. And when there's a country like Russia or China or Iran or North Korea or Cuba or who, when it's one of these countries, then that threatens their privilege because it's threatening that hegemony. So again, unfortunately, there was nothing, coming out of that. But, the real thing I wanted to kind of touch on today, and it's a familiar topic, but one that doesn't get talked about much when we're not in the context of an election, is how useless these political parties are that we have. I think most of the people who are listening to the show can recognize that the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are both awful. The Democratic Party, again, they're just basically neocons at this point, although, with identity politics. So they're all in favor of, the whole woke thing, as long as that doesn't actually touch on global white supremacy, basically through mechanisms like NATO, which NATO, again, is a military alliance of Western countries that at one point attempted to colonize basically the entire world. When you talk about the history of the UK and Germany and France and Belgium and the Netherlands and all these countries, Spain, like these are countries that tried to colonize basically the entire planet. And these are the countries that make up NATO, along with the United States. So again, it's fine when we're engaging in identity politics in the United States domestically, but when you start talking about what white supremacy is on a global scale and how NATO reinforces that, and how liberals benefit from that, no matter how bleeding heart and how woke they are, then it just kind of exposes what a fraud they are, really. And, there's other aspects of that as well, from Joe Biden being a union buster and them facilitating the genocide in Gaza, even though, they're seemingly not as bad as Trump on that issue. They still were, in real terms, helping Benjamin Netanyahu carry out that genocide. And overall, you just go back to everything that they actually do in real terms, even the best of them, right? The fraud squad and Bernie Sanders, no matter how good they may be on rhetoric, it's always sort of this containment and sheepdogging and diverting any energies that may go into actually challenging the system into just voting harder for the Democrats. Just vote harder. But what's interesting is every time that they actually get power, they don't really do anything substantial, which is funny because, Trump gets in there and he has a razor thin majority in the House of Representatives and they pass something like the Big Beautiful Bill. Why was there never a Democratic version of the Big Beautiful Bill? Why did they never, when they had super majorities, do anything to, doing single payer health care or, something that would actually change the country and the world in a meaningful way? It's because they're not real opposition. They're frauds. They're just up there to engage in rhetoric and get people worked up and getting the energy that they may have otherwise diverted into things like unionizing, getting them to just go and vote and think that voting is the way out. And similarly, we see the same thing with the Republicans, even the Donald Trump MAGA version of the Republican Party, because yes, it is more populist in rhetoric, and they may be doing, some things like tariffs or pretending that they're going to, things like that. But substantially, has anything really changed since Donald Trump took office? I don't think so. There's been these deportations and funding for ICE and stuff like that. But in terms of delivering on his campaign rhetoric, just going back to the whole Russia thing, he promised to end the Russia-Ukraine war within 24 hours of taking office. It's been way more than 24 hours. It's been 7 months. And yes, there's been some movement there, which is a great thing, but it's not really delivering on those campaign promises, especially in the context of Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump now protecting Epstein's clients. So it's all just a farce, both of those parties. They're both corporate controlled. And also on the subject of Donald Trump being, quote unquote, America first, he's clearly not America first. He's Israel first. He's controlled by Benjamin Netanyahu. And he will go right along with whatever Israel wants. If Israel wants to completely take over Gaza and make that part of Israel, he'll go right along with it and has stated that he will. So again, both of these parties are complete frauds. They do not represent the American people at all. They represent Israel. They represent the military-industrial complex. They represent this NATO Atlanticism. They represent the ruling class, and neither one of them represents the American people at all. No matter how much they say that they do and how much rhetoric they have about taking on the elites and fighting for the common man, they don't do that at all. They do not represent the common man. They represent the elites. So I think that's just self-evident at this point. And if anyone has been, paying attention to the headlines at all on a day-to-day basis, they can see that. So I think most of you recognize that. But outside of just those parties, I think we have to acknowledge that the minor parties in the United States also are terrible and are not creating any kind of avenue for change. That includes the Libertarian Party, which, despite being around for several decades and having won millions of votes in previous presidential elections and holding some local offices, they really have not changed anything for the better. And honestly, I don't think that a lot of their philosophy would change things for the better, because it would just result in greater protections for corporations under quote unquote capitalism and the free market. It would just go for empowering the rich and hurting the working class. And I do understand the libertarian argument about the state partnering with companies and how that should be dismantled, but I don't think in real terms their actual suggestions would do that. I think that deregulation would happen within the context of these state monopolies, the state protected monopolies. And I also don't think that libertarians really think about the full scope of how the state has helped facilitate the current situation that we're in now, and how a free market could even exist. Because when you think about property lines, when you think about these corporations, who incorporates the corporations? Who provides those legal protections? Who invaded North America and kicked off the indigenous inhabitants of North America and then carved up the land with these fictitious property lines? It was the state. So our entire economic system is founded upon imperialism, is founded upon the state. So by just saying, oh, we're going to roll back the state now, it doesn't undo what has already happened in the past. The land was already stolen. The resources were already stolen. So by just rolling back regulations at this point, that doesn't really undo the crimes that have already been perpetrated. And I understand, again, trying to remove force from the equation and things like that. But ironically, I think that all that we're doing is giving that right to initiate force, or the power to engage in force, giving that to things like private police and private military contractors. And you end up in this weird sort of, again, public-private partnership, which is what we've kind of been seeing the results of over the last 40 years, right? Like when you think about neoliberalism and everything that Clinton represented, and just this, like Blackwater in Iraq, obviously you could point to things within those that are not libertarian, but that was actually a shift over to the more libertarian worldview. And I think that's really what the Libertarian Party, the best that they can hope to accomplish is things like that, is more neoliberalism, which I don't think has been a net benefit if you look at the last 40 or 50 years and what has already been accomplished. Beyond that, I also think that the Libertarian Party has a lot of internal issues. When you look at all of the controversies surrounding any of their recent presidential nominations, when you look at all the controversy around the Mises Caucus and these different, the Libertarian Socialist Caucus, and just these the infighting that happens within the party, the whole Donald Trump thing that happened in the 2024 election, whether people throughout the party debating whether they should support him. I think it's just kind of evident that the Libertarian Party is a complete joke at this point. They are not accomplishing anything beyond, winning some votes, getting some people in office. After 50 years of being around, shouldn't they have accomplished a little bit more than they have? And again, even if they do accomplish anything, I don't think it's going to be anything outside of what we've already seen, outside of more Reagan, Thatcher, Bill Clinton neoliberalism. I think that's the best they can hope for. But beyond that, you also have the Green Party, and for longtime listeners of this show, all of the criticisms that I have of the Green Party, despite the fact that pretty much every Green Party every single Green Party presidential candidate, nominee, ever has been a guest on this show. But with everything that happened in 2020 with Howie Hawkins, I think that really exposed not only the problems within the Green Party and how it's run, how it's really this trust fund hippie kind of social club, and they don't really do a lot to build the party. They don't do a lot to bring people in. I think it also exposes the fact that there's this tendency within the Green Party and within libertarian socialism generally, to kind of go along with establishment narratives like Russiagate, right? Because the whole MO is to, I guess, sort of question authority is basically the whole thing, right? Like being anti-authoritarian. And what that results in oftentimes is going along with establishment narratives that claim to be disrupting authoritarianism abroad, right? That's the whole kind of rhetoric that we have against Russia, against China, is that these are authoritarian regimes and we need to take on authoritarianism. You hear Bernie Sanders say stuff like this all the time, right? It's democracy versus authoritarianism, and Putin is an authoritarian. And in that interview that I did with Howie Hawkins, you heard him regurgitate that kind of rhetoric because his libertarian, socialist, anarchist, green perspective has led him to believe that the U.S. isn't always the imperialist in the equation, that there can be other imperialists like Russia, like China, even though those countries are operating in the context of global U.S. hegemony and global U.S. imperialism. They just kind of discount that and effectively go along with CIA talking points about how we are really the beacon of freedom in the world. And, it just goes back to this whole comic book mentality of we're the superheroes, we're the good guys, we're G.I. Joe, we're taking on Cobra, basically. And it's funny, too, because there's sort of a double think that happens there where you'll hear Howie Hawkins criticize NATO, but then he'll also embrace all of this NATO rhetoric against Vladimir Putin and kind of tacitly go along with that perspective and that worldview. And you see other, connotations of that with Syria. He was also very anti-Assad. And look at Syria now. Assad is gone. Is Syria really better? Is Syria that much better now that Al-Qaeda is running Syria? You also saw this with Noam Chomsky, by the way. When I interviewed Noam Chomsky, one of the times he said that he wanted, or maybe it was twice, but he mentioned that he wanted U.S. ground forces protecting the Kurds in Syria. He said barely armed, but just having them there would protect the Kurds against Assad. So again, this whole Green Party, libertarian, socialist, left libertarian kind of worldview, it effectively ends up going along with the establishment, similar to how the Libertarian Party does, right? Because this rhetoric from both the Greens and the Libertarians seems radically different. It seems as though they're really questioning the system, they're questioning these mechanisms of power, but effectively they don't. And I think that the change that they're advocating could only happen within the context of the power dynamics that we already have. Again, because they're not really suggesting things that would radically change the system. They're not suggesting things like or they're not working towards things like a general strike, right? Like they're not saying, all right, on this day, we're all going to have a general strike and we're going to try to shut down the system. And they don't do things to really build the party. There's not that kind of outreach. Like, where are the Greens out there doing soup kitchens or things like that? Where are they doing that kind of community building to say, all right, we are this institution outside of the establishment? And I think what it comes down to, again, is just trying to think of a way to operate outside of just voting harder. Because we just see this again and again. And insofar as any other minor parties exist, it's a lot of the same thing, right? All these socialist parties and whatnot. It always comes down to just vote harder, just vote harder. That's what democracy is. Just go to the ballot box every 2 to 4 years, cast your vote, and that's it. All done. Go back home now. Watch the news, debate, post things on Twitter or whatever, but that's what democracy comes down to. But it's really about a lot more than that. It's about building a community, building infrastructure outside of the infrastructure that's controlled by the elites. We have to create these unions that are not controlled by the co-opted capitalist unions. We have to create mechanisms for existing, surviving without relying on government welfare, for example. Like, where are the libertarians doing that? Where are you creating avenues for people to sustain themselves without having to rely on government welfare? So just going out there and saying things like, we got to vote harder every 4 years, 2 years, whatever, like that just kind of speaks to how ineffective they are and what kind of a fraud they are, I think. It's just a fraud. It's just a show. It's pro wrestling. That's what it comes down to. It's just pro wrestling. It's theater. It's get worked up, go to the show, cheer, boo, whatever, have a reaction, and then that's it. Go home. That's all it comes down to. So, insofar as we need political parties, we need a new one. We need a real political party. We need something that builds infrastructures outside of the current system. We need something that provides for, welfare, community welfare, things like Food Not Bombs. That Food Not Bombs is a great organization. Things like that are providing an avenue for people to organize, to take care of each other and not rely upon the system. Insofar as we can build an alternative to the system and depend on each other without, again, this mechanism that is controlled by the global elite, insofar as we can actually build something that is not co-opted, is not controlled, is not a farce, that's what we should be doing. So I don't know how we get there. I don't know how we do it. It seems as though there's constantly people talking about, I'm going to start this new third party. I'm going to start this new third party. And then it just doesn't really happen, doesn't really take off. So I don't know how we actually get to the point where we start doing that, but that is the solution. That is how we get out of this mess. It's only by abandoning these co-opted establishment institutions and building something totally new. That's how we get away from this. There can't be any reform of the Republican Party. There can't be any reform of the Democratic Party. It's not going to happen. It can appear as though it happens. There can be something like Donald Trump and MAGA, or there can be something like a Barack Obama. But what happens when those people actually get in office? All of that rhetoric goes out the door, and we just have the same old policies that we've had for decades. Just more of the same. So we can't just keep doing more of the same. We can't just keep voting and expecting anything to change. I think that's, a popular saying. I think it gets attributed to Albert Einstein that doing the same thing over and over again, that's the definition of insanity. I don't know if he actually said that or not, but that kind of speaks to just the concept here that if we just keep voting, we're like Charlie Brown and Lucy holding the football. Just keep expecting that something's going to be different next time when it never has been, and there really isn't a reason to think that it ever will be. So I don't know how we, I don't know how we get by that. I don't know how we actually, move to the next stage of building something real. It seems as though we're kind of stalled out on that point, but I think we all need to kind of think about that. Just kind of remember that going into the next election. Don't win that fell for it again award. Think about what the Republican Party represents, what the Democratic Party represents, what the Libertarian Party represents, what the Green Party represents, how they have operated, what they have accomplished. Because I'm not seeing really anything good from any of them. I'm not seeing any major achievement. I'm just seeing this country that I was born in getting worse and worse and worse every year. I don't know about you, but that's just kind of the net result of these dynamics playing out. So I'm kind of over just voting and voting and voting and hoping that finally somebody does what they said they promised to do. I'm looking for a real peaceful movement to change things in a better direction. People getting together and creating mutual aid networks, things that can take care of each other, things that don't rely upon Washington, don't rely upon corporations, don't rely upon the global financial system, that are willing to divorce themselves from this establishment, neocon, imperialist foreign policy that we have. That's what I'm hoping to see someday. But again, I don't know how we get there. If you have any ideas on how we achieve that, please drop them in the comments. But yeah, that's just kind of my thoughts on politics right now, and kind of why I'm disillusioned overall. I'm just kind of like over politics, because politics sucks and it's just a show and it's fake. It's pro wrestling, and I'm just kind of over this red, blue, crappy corporate pro wrestling that we have. It's just stupid and dumb, and I'm over it. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Again, folks, we are rapidly approaching the 300th episode. I'm going to have some old friends on, actual friends of mine who were there in the original days of Primo Nutmeg, having them on the show to just talk about the show, talk about culture, talk about really anything, just kind of hang out and have a good time, honestly. So I'm really looking forward to that. Hopefully you are too. Again, we have a few more episodes before then. I don't think I'm going to have a guest on, honestly. It's not looking that way, just given my schedule. So we're probably going to have one or two more updates like this, just monologues, and then either one or two recap shows, the clip shows that we typically do that every year. So look forward to that. I may actually have something to share too that has not been aired before. So that'll be something cool. But anyway, again, celebrating the 10-year anniversary of the show this month. I appreciate all of you folks staying around and being a fan through the ups, the downs, the long hiatuses. I really do appreciate you liking, commenting, sharing, subscribing. All of you patrons out there, you've been a real support too. So thanks again, folks, and stay tuned for the next episode.